Hello and welcome to the Denzalist Gaming Podcast. This one, we'll get straight to it, is about games as a service and are they made to fail. Should be an interesting subject because at the moment when you look at companies like Microsoft, like PlayStation, like EA, virtually all publishers and games companies, they seem to have their main focus on making all games, even if they, have previously been single player games. Focus trying to turn them all into games as a service. And if you don't know what games as a service is, it's basically where you've got games with no end, so like Fortnite, like Apex Legends, where basically the developers and publishers can sort of keep churning, content out, depending on quality. Sometimes for fees or like DLC updates and things like that. But at the moment, the most popular system is a free-to-play service with microtransactions and skins and things like that. Sometimes they are gameplay microtransactions and things like that. So it covers a great lot of things. And not just things like Battle Royale games, we're talking games like Destiny, GTA Online, there's so Overwatch, there's so much. And the thing is, at the moment, the crux of why I'm doing this episode is, with all this focus on games as a service, are we losing actual creative original games because these developers, not really the developers, the publishers are trying to go on to the next bandwagon, because they see games like Apex and Fortnite and even Destiny, not so much as like Fortnite, but they've sort of like changed the gaming landscape, Epic Games wouldn't exist, like I said, the streaming service wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Fortnite and the money they make off that. It's like one game. You look at like GTA Online with Rockstar, they have literally shown that they don't actually have to do anything else. They can carry on putting content onto that, and that'll be enough. That's why they've, put a really crappy, GTA trilogy, remaster, and it was absolute garbage because they outsourced it, and they didn't really care about it because their main focus is GTA Online and the money it makes. And all these companies, they keep on making game after game, and like I said, and a lot of them are built to fail, because literally, if you haven't got that instant, that instant Twitch or that instant sort of, Discord hype, where people will, happily watch the games and then play it themselves. A lot of games, worked naturally, like, and got a fervent fan base quickly, but not ridiculously, like Rocket League. That started out in obscurity, or games like Among Us, and sometimes these games get propelled into the stratosphere, and all these companies want to have a part of this, even if they know that the games they're making or the games they're forcing these developers and renowned games companies to make and they know they're going to fail, but they still put them out anyway. And I wanted to talk a bit about these failures. I mean, you know, you can just think of, I mean, even like every year there's at least 8 to 10 games as a service, you know, which ends up failing. I mean, we've had recent ones like Hyperscape. I mean, even Battlefield 2042, you know, it literally was supposed to be the game which they could, you know, keep alive for, you know, for at least, you know, well over a year or more. You know, Babylon's Fall, you know, you've got a great, you know, you know, developers who, you know, Platinum Games who make absolutely stellar first person story games. That is what they're known for. You know, when you think of games like Nier and Nier Automata, they are exquisite games, and that's what, you know, even games like Bayonetta and things like that, that's what they do well. So when you've got Square Enix telling them to basically make a games as a service game, guess what? It turned into a shit show, and it was a disaster. And that's the main sort of problem with these sort of things. The bar to make something, you know, in the eyes of these publishers, you know, successful and continually successful. You know, it doesn't matter if this is a small development company, you know, a handful of people who've made something they really want to do, but then they've had to change the vision into something which they don't recognise anymore. And there's many stories of that happening. Unfortunately, when you get bought out by a big publisher, or you've got exclusive contracts or etc., you have to sort of, you know, they say how high and you jump, basically. And sometimes that isn't the case, but sometimes you have to do what they say to get the projects you want to do eventually. I mean, you look at what's the name of the company? The company who did Titanfall and Apex. You know, it's like they had to make, well, like I said, this was something they did themselves, but they literally told EA, it's like, we don't want your grubby hands on it. It's like, we have made this. If this is successful, we do it our way. And that's why they put it out of nowhere, and hype just went absolutely exploded. You didn't need a massive marketing push, and that's what they did. And if EA promoted it their way, I don't think it would be as much a success and much in the you know, of millions of players basically. So yeah. Anyway, we'll take a short break because I'm going to split these up, because I know sometimes when I talk it gets a bit too overloading. So yeah, we'll take a short break and we'll get back to it. So welcome back. So what I'm going to do now, we're going to probably do a quick deep dive into some of the famous failures, and I'm not doing it to highlight how bad the games were. I'm more highlighting why they failed to get a constant general audience, and how they sort of like publishers of, you know, forcing this games as a service onto games which could have easily been successful if they were single player only games. I mean, the main one I want to talk about is the Marvel Avengers game. It shows where later on they brought out a Guardians of the Galaxy game, and it was a solo, it was a single player story based game. And guess what? It was very received very well. I think it sold very well. It was a very well received game, and that's because the people making the game wanted just to tell a story and make the characters fleshed out like in the comics and things like that, and to make their story. And from what I've played, I love the hell out of it. They've got the characters spot on, the personalities, the interactions, and it's a fun game. It really is, and that's what Avengers could have been. But Square Enix, like I said, there's a pattern. They tried with Avengers, and then they forced another company to make another games as a service, which also was a massive failure, and Babylon's Fall. So basically this was using the Marvel property, which should be just a win, because when you've had the previous games like the Marvel Spider-Man games by Insomniac, and they are excellent. It was like it couldn't fail, because if it was anywhere near games like Spider-Man, people love it. I mean, you've got all the Avengers in a story-based game. It's like, how can that fail? And it did, and it was all down to games as a service. Yes, the main story was short and had problems, but I think a lot of the main problems in the story part of the game was due to filling out with multiplayer based objectives in the story. So there was like hold the point, capture the point, and it just felt really out of pace, because it was just adding like online multiplayer game features in a single player story, and it just felt so weird. But if you didn't like the story, I understand, because it was having a new character, Kamala Khan, but I thought the character was very endearing. And when you think they're trying to portray her in that TV shows and movies now, and I don't think they have done half as good a job as the character in the game. But but like I said, I think if their entire focus was on a single player game first, and then they could have expanded the stories even in like a DLC format. You could have had this Kamala Khan story interweaving with the Avengers, and then you could have had I would have happily paid extra for a DLC season pass of like the Iron Man story interwoven, and having that as a paid DLC separate. That would have been absolutely great. And then if that game was a massive success, then you could have done the multiplayer and work that naturally. Because if you've got a fan base and you've got a great game, and other games have done this, like Ghost of Tsushima, they basically put a free I think for people who own the game, they put a Legends mode, and like I said, it's not the most in-depth multiplayer, but is it bloody fun, engaging and bloody tough? Yes. And that was, and that was what they did, and it's like they could have done something very similar. Not everything has to be a games as a service, and I think that's the most disappointing thing when you look at games like Avengers, Anthem's in the same boat. You had BioWare, famous for good single player stories, and yes, they had the abject failure of Andromeda, Mass Effect, but people still had hope that Anthem looked a pretty game with some interesting flying mechanics, and it like I said, if this was like a Dragon Age, if it was a well fleshed out single player story, I think it would have been very good. But the problem was they spent years without a vision. I think they knew that it was going to be a games as a service game, but they didn't know how to implement it. They didn't know how to use their engine, their in-house engine properly for this, RPG with multiplayer games as a service functions, and it just it was just a disaster. From developers, publisher, everything. They were all to blame. Just mismanagement all the way down. Where I'm not saying it would have been so much better, but I think the game probably would have had more of an audience. Even if there was bugs and there was problems, even if it was like a 6 or 7 out of 10 game, it still would have been loved. If you had it, like I said, because that's the problem when you're looking at these sort of multiplayer games, because you are trying to use servers, things like that. Sometimes the graphical fidelity isn't as good as when you look at games like Horizon Forbidden West and like the God of War and things like that. I think sometimes when you make a single player story, I think you can work more on the visuals, the storytelling, and I think that's what I think these games companies who are all vying to be the next Fortnite completely forget, because it's like they seem to be happy doing 10 or 12 failures or more if they have even the sniff of having the next Fortnite or the next Apex or the next Destiny. I mean, how many Destiny claims has there been? Even recently, like Outriders, that had potential, but it was released as a bit of buggy, messy thing, and there was nothing to keep people playing. It was an interesting concept, but like I said, the problem, I think that's the main problem with these games as a service. You can have an average or pretty good products at the beginning, but you need to sustain that. You need to have a constant team of people to keep putting out content at a incredible rate to keep the play base engaged. And when you hear about crunch, if you don't know about crunch, it's basically forcing these developers to do overtime, is mostly unpaid and forced to basically make a game out on time or an update on time. And that's the problem. There's more issues with crunch in these companies which have games as a service, because they are constantly having to make this new content every couple of weeks or every month, and not just small content, drastic changes. So, you're going to have a big team of people constantly crunching to keep this game alive, where if you just release a single player content, you only have that one purchase of 50 or 60 pound, but like I said, you don't have to have a constant team updating it. You can get people doing bug fixes and quality of life little changes and tweaks, but that would be all you need, because if you've got a good game when you've made it, you don't have to do a lot with it. And like I said, and guess what, if that game is popular and there's enough fan base, you can make a sequel and you can make money on that. Like I said, you can do a season pass or like a DLC. I think that isn't too egregious on a single player. I hate when you're paying for skins on single player games, but if there's new game content and story content out to 6 or 12 months after, then that's great. And that's the only problem. A lot of these issues are seeping into other games, not just games as a service. I mean, you look at one of the most famous ones was the Street Fighter 5, where they literally had content on the disc, but it was paywalled. So literally they've already made the content. So they made the DLC. So they made the game, but they give you a bare bones game for the money you've paid, and they want you to give more money, even though that information is on that disc and it's available. And unfortunately, these despicable ways to do business in the gaming industry is going to get a lot worse and worse until people, don't take that shit. And like I said, no developer and no publisher is, not guilty from milking these games as a service. I mean, Metal Gear Survive. It's not a Metal Gear game because, Kojima was long fired and long walked off. But that was the thing. They did a games as a service multiplayer, updates and all this jazz. And guess what? Nobody bought it because it looked trash, and it was trash for that 76. I don't know how this still has a fan base, but it does. And Bethesda have done absolute evil to this player base, even with a premium service, which basically only adds like minor things, but people still give them money. I mean, God bless them. If they're happy, they're happy. But yeah, and even like Ubisoft, who's had many failures of current time, but their next Assassin's Creed is a games as a service game, which they own, because people are getting bored of Assassin's Creed. Their great idea, instead of doing like a yearly or bi-yearly title, that they're going to do a games as a service. And yes, it might be a massive success, or it could be boring as anything. And I think the main issue with these games is that all these companies, the ones who have these massive failures, they fail to understand that A, not everybody wants to play these games as a service games, but B, most of the people who already play games as service games, usually, if they're going to move to your game, they'll go off something else. So like if you were playing like Overwatch, you've probably gone off another multiplayer shooter like I did. I played Paladins before I played Overwatch, and it's the same thing. If you've got stuff in the same genre, if you want to make the next battle royale, then all you're doing is getting the people who already play like Fortnite and already play Apex Legends to move onto yours, and that's what I think they don't get. There's no millions of new users who are just going to, who's never played a games as a service game, who's just going to say, oh yes, that's it, you're the game, I'm going to stick with you for for the life of the game. And that doesn't happen. People do drift from one game to another, and that is the main issue, that there's never going to be a constant player base for all these games as a service games. There is guaranteed to be failures, because there's not, even though there is millions of gamers, not all of them play console gaming. Not all of them, because a lot of them do mobile gaming. So you're taking a percentage there. Even if you do a cross bundle, mobile title with PC and console, like I said, other companies have already done that. Like I said, Fortnite, like Apex, and they've done it well. So even if you try and get your hands on this market, making a massive cross-play, product, which if you're a new title, that is very hard and need a lot of resources, which you're not going to get, you're not going to succeed. And if you do, sometimes it's just blind luck, or somebody who's got a great idea for marketing, and sometimes it's as simple as something like that. You can look into a a world famous £1 million making a week game, but the truth is 99% of the other games are made to fail. So I think I've ranted on a bit more than I should have on this, but I hope you guys find this as an interesting topic, and like I said, if you want more of this, let me know. If you want me to do more like top 10 lists, I'm happy to do that as well. So I will bid you farewell, and look after yourselves and your mental health, and take care. Bye.